All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Monday, everybody. Hope all of you guys had a great weekend and that you're having a great start to your week. Got a jam-packed show for you today. We're going to hit a game reaction off the top between the Milwaukee Bucks and the Brooklyn Nets. Interesting game. The Nets had them against the ropes, but the Bucks fought back and got a big win thanks to Giannis, who kind of got them going in the late third quarter, and they rode that to the finish. Some interesting stuff in crunch time in that game, too. After that, I want to talk a little bit about Nikola Jokic and the level he's hitting offensively right now and where it ranks for me all time, and especially some specific kind of schematic stuff that's helping to unlock it all, and a little bit of his partnership with Russell Westbrook. And then at the tail end of the show, as we do every Monday, power rankings. Going to hit the top 10 teams in the league, talk a little bit about each of them. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, subscribe to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at @JasonLT so you guys don't miss show announcements. Don't forget about our podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. Don't forget it's also helpful if you leave a rating and a review on that front. We also have brand new social media feeds on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook that are for the Hoops Tonight channel, where we're releasing more content, so make sure you follow us there. And last but not least, keep dropping mailbag questions in the YouTube comments. We have a really small slate tonight. I think it's just Raptors at Knicks. So tomorrow morning, we're probably just going to do a brief kind of like preview of the in-season tournament. Obviously, it's single elimination, so anything can happen, but I'll give you guys a prediction anyway. And then at the tail end of that show, we're just going to answer some mailbag questions to kill some time before we get to the games that evening, and then we'll be breaking them down, obviously, as we get further into the week. All right, let's talk some basketball. So Bucks-Nets was an interesting game to me on a bunch of different levels. First of all, the Nets and just what makes them so scrappy, and the simple fact that they just have a lot of players that are good at things that are mandatory to succeed in the modern NBA in terms of covering ground on the perimeter, pressuring the ball to make an offense feel uncomfortable, being able to chase people off of the three-point line into lower percentage shots that are contested twos. They've got a lot of guys that can do that at a pretty high level. And again, this is a team that I'd keep an eye on in the trade market. There's just a lot of guys there that can help really good teams around the league. And I'm curious to see where some of these guys end up over the course of the next few months. But they have the Bucks on the ropes. They're defending Dame extremely well. Dennis Schroeder just applying a lot of ball pressure. He's got good quickness to stay in front of Dame, but also the length to contest his pull-up jump shot. They were defending really well, and it kind of looked like things were teetering for the Bucks a little bit there in the late third quarter as the Nets kept making runs. I think they went up by as much as 11 in that kind of late third quarter stretch. But then Giannis just refused to let them lose that game and completely took things over. He was doing a lot of work in the post, hitting that little hook shot over his left shoulder. And again, this is something I've been dying for Giannis to build out over the course of the last few years because I just think it's a more reliable over-the-top shot. What is the purpose of the over-the-top shot? It's for when you're fatigued or when you run into an elite defender that takes away the easy stuff that you can get at the rim as a power player, right? There's a certain amount of through schematic approach and just through Giannis's indomitable will that he's going to be able to get to the basket a certain amount of the time. But when you run into certain types of defenders that can slide their feet, absorb contact, and make you shoot over the top, that's where it brings value to have something that you can make over the top. It just has to be a high enough percentage shot to be valuable. And that's where, when Giannis was taking a lot of off the dribble jump shots and a lot of them were threes, he was not able to hit enough of them to justify it even in the large volume, let alone the small volume. But now, because he's gotten pretty decent at that little pull-up elbow jump shot, and because he's starting to really turn to that left shoulder hook and hit it at a higher percentage, he's got something that he can go to both make things easier for him in terms of fatigue, but also something he can go to when the team needs a bucket. And it turned into a situation where in crunch time, the Nets really had no choice but to start double-teaming Giannis. And this is where it turned into what I thought was a really gutsy call from Doc Rivers and what I thought was the right decision under the circumstances. Dennis Schroeder was giving them a ton of issues, so they closed with Andre Jackson on the ball. You would think in a lot of cases, depending on the matchup, maybe you'd want a better offensive player there, but I thought it was the right call, especially with how successful Dennis Schroeder was kind of getting to his spots. And then the second piece of it was, even though Brook Lopez can shoot, he was not having a confident game. If I remember correctly, he didn't even hit a three in this particular game. But Bobby Portis was feeling good and comfortable on those above the break threes, especially at the wing. And so when you're double teaming out of the post, there are a couple of like simple reads that come out of it, right? Like the first read is the guy who makes the pass, right? So the guy makes the post entry, he's sitting one pass away, but he usually has to be pretty far away. It's got to be like a 25, 26 footer. Bobby hit one of those off of a basic double team off the left block. Giannis is dribbling. Here comes the guy digging down into the post, whip it back out. Bobby knocks down the shot. But then there's also the swing passes that come out of that. But what it ended up being was above the break threes on the wings, a little bit further out, but that were moderately contested. And so you needed someone that could confidently step into a shot. You needed somebody that wasn't going to, because if you catch at 26 feet and the guy's closing out at you and you pump fake and you swing it, it might not be open anymore and the advantage could be gone. It wasn't going to end in some sort of completely wide open, uncontested three. They needed somebody to step up and knock down moderately contested threes off of those Giannis double teams. And Bobby just got hot and he made three after three after three. Chris Middleton made one in that stretch as well. And on the other end of the floor, to Bobby's credit, the Nets were picking on him quite a bit. It was a kind of a steady stream of like Cam Johnson and Dennis Schroeder just picking on Bobby in switches. And Cam hit like a pretty tough sidestepping three above the break. And then Dennis just barely turned the corner on Bobby and kind of took a bump and knocked down a little bank shot. And it looked like, ooh, this could get a little ugly here with the Nets attacking Bobby. But he sat in a stance and he got some big stops down the stretch, forced Cam Johnson into a really ugly miss, flat out just blocked Dennis Schroeder on a driving floater. So Bobby ended up being kind of the hero in this game with the key stops down the stretch as the Nets were trying to hunt him and hitting those big above the break threes off of those Giannis double teams. But I really want to zoom in on Giannis for a second, because what he did in that game is something that I've been harping on for a while, which is like there's a certain amount of malaise that is inherent in the NBA regular season. I mean, the Bucks just ran into it in that Hawks game in particular, where they just ran off the floor in transition. And it's like, clearly you're just not engaged. You're not running. You're not sprinting. You're not picking up the ball. You're not defending the basket. Just little basic details in transition defense, and you end up taking a loss, right? But like, that's part of the NBA season. It's long. It drags on. And so this is where like what Giannis did in that third quarter when things were teetering. He is the guy who has the ability to change the tenor of a game and get his teammates reinvested in a way where you can then follow that through to a win. This is where I was being so critical with LeBron James and Anthony Davis last week. There's no doubt that there were some injuries, right? Austin Reeves is out of the lineup. You got, Jared Vanderbilt's hurt. You're dealing with some guys out, and it makes things tougher, right? But that's exactly when you need your superstar players to leverage their gifts even more. Because the more you leverage your gifts, the easier you make things for your teammates, then they start to succeed, and then the whole team starts to take off. It's the rising tide that lifts all boats, right? It's like you're seeing this with Nikola Jokic all season too, and that's the thing. Like Giannis, he's playing at an insanely high level right now. That was another MVP level performance yesterday. He's at 33, 12, and 6 on the season at 63% true shooting. That's just completely outrageous, and might not even be enough with how well Nikola Jokic is playing right now. But like, I just thought that was such a great reminder last night from Giannis of like what you expect from the real top tier guys in the league, which is like, no matter what night of the season it is, no matter what the schedule has been looking like, maybe your co-star, an older guy like Dame, just doesn't have it going. Things are just looking a little bit bleak. And to have a guy that can just step up and just kind of gain control of the situation and turn a loss into a win is the differentiator in a lot of cases. And most importantly, it comes down to establishing habits. The teams that let games like that slip and just go, screw it, it's an 82-game season, it's marathon, not a sprint. We'll make it up when we need to. And, whatever, seeding doesn't really matter. We can go beat anybody if we have to. And it's like, yeah, theoretically, all of those concepts are true. Like, yeah, the season is long. And as long as you feel like you can beat any of the teams in your conference, it doesn't really matter who you play first or where you go play them. But the bottom line is the teams that win multiple playoff rounds, the teams that play the level of basketball necessary to go through that grind in the postseason, tend to be the teams that find themselves in a tough game in the third quarter against a team that they should beat and fight and get the win, rather than roll over and lose. And I thought that was just a great juxtaposition of Giannis compared to some of the other players around the league, and just the way you're supposed to attack things in the middle of December when you have the types of big picture goals that the Milwaukee Bucks have. So shout out to Giannis Antetokounmpo. It's the most wonderful time of the year for getting in on all of the hoops, football, and hockey action at DraftKings Sportsbook. In the season of giving, we're being gifted college football and basketball, pro football and basketball, and pro hockey too. Almost 24/7. So many games every day, so many opportunities to place your first bet. Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and place your bet. Current Super Bowl winners on DraftKings right now, the Detroit Lions at plus 260 and the Kansas City Chiefs at plus 425. And here's a gift for all new customers. Bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. That's code HOOPS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins when you bet just $5. Happy holidays from DraftKings. The crown is yours. Let's talk about Jokic for a minute, though. So he goes for 56 in Washington, probably the worst loss of any team in the NBA this season as the Nuggets lose to the 2-win Wizards at that point. But Jokic goes for 56. He goes for a 48 in Atlanta, went for 38 last week in Golden State. So his last 4 games, Jokic is averaging 42 points, 15 rebounds, and 8 assists on 56% from the field, 50% from 3, and 78% from the free throw line. He's also averaging 3 steals per game over that span. There's a couple of specific things that are driving this. Obviously, I've talked a lot about Jokic's jump shot, and I don't need to get too far into that. Didn't shoot the ball super well last year. Started to hurt him with teams leaving him open on pops and in spot-up situations. We won't get any further into that. He is shooting extremely well this season, 1.35 points per jump shot. Among all players in the NBA that have attempted at least 100 jump shots this year, that 1.35 points per shot mark ranks second in the entire league. That's how good Jokic is shooting the basketball. Anybody want to guess who's number 1? AJ Green from the Milwaukee Bucks was number 1 for players who have attempted at least 100 shots. But just obviously shooting the ball extremely well. He's especially shooting the ball well as of late in face-up situations. This has been a big part of both the Atlanta game and the Washington game, whether it's like catching at the elbow and just turning and facing up, coming off of screening actions and kind of like flowing into ISOs around that like foul line area. But all he does is he just kind of jabs and just leans back and just shoots right over the top. He's shooting 78% so far this year on those face-up jump shots, according to Synergy. That's been a big thing that's boosted his scoring. Again, like when you can accentuate your scoring with jump shooting, that's when you can hit some really high scoring numbers because it's easier to counter like crazy paint scoring with help defense than it is to deal with a guy who's just shooting over the top of you every single time. He's scored over 10 points on jump shots in 4 of the last 5 games. It's been a huge part of his success. And then he's just absolutely crushing teams rolling in ball screens. And this is something that was not really working for the Nuggets in the early part of the season. And I want to dive into that concept a little bit. He didn't have a single game all season before this weekend where he had over 10 points in a single game in roll man possessions, meaning like catching the ball in a ball screen in the pocket and scoring out of those situations. Not a single game with over 10. He had 27 points on roll man possessions in the Washington and Atlanta games combined. This is where I want to shout out Russell Westbrook. So think of it like this. What opens up the pocket in a ball screen? So like if Jamal's dribbling at the top of the key or if he's coming off of a dribble handoff, whatever you want to call it, that 2-man game, and his defender is chasing over the top, and Jokic's defender is defending in, kind of a typical ball screen coverage where he's kind of splitting the difference between both guys. What's going to get the opening for Jokic in the pocket? On-ball defenders behind whoever's the ball handler. Screen defender is splitting the difference. Usually like that no-roller behind coverage, right? How do you get Jokic open there? That screen defender has to lean towards the ball handler. If he doesn't lean towards the ball handler, the pocket's not open. If the pocket's not open, Jokic isn't going to get his opportunities to score there. Jamal Murray, when he was at his best, and what made this so effective, was Jamal was cooking teams coming off of these screening actions, whether it was with curling and getting into floater range and making shots there, or if he's coming off and shooting pull-up jump shots, right? Jamal hasn't been as good this year. So it's been harder to unlock that part of the game. Russell Westbrook has been getting downhill in these ball screens. And it's become such a problem for teams that he's either engaging the screen defender and getting that pocket, or they're trying to meet Russ at the screen to stop him from turning the corner. Because once he gets ahead of steam, he can be such a problem there. And so Russ's ability to engage the screen defender by actually getting downhill in those screens is forcing Jokic's defender to account for Russ, which is leaving Jokic with all these super easy opportunities in the short range where he's so deadly with that floater or quick isolation moves on the catch where he can just spin over one of his shoulders and knock down a shot. It has completely unlocked something that was missing during the early part of this season. Again, 27 roll man points in 2 games after not having a single game over 10 points to start the season. Russell Westbrook with 23 assists in the last 2 games, 14 of those assists were to Nikola Jokic. It's been a really interesting partnership. And again, like a simple basketball concept, a 2-man game requires 2 threats. And it's not going to be as effective if one of the guys is not a threat. And say what you want about Russell Westbrook and some of his weaknesses at this point in his career, he's still a great athlete that can turn the corner and get downhill and wreak havoc for a defense. And he's done a lot to help Nikola Jokic get going in the roll area, that short roll area on the floor. But this brings me to something I was talking about, or thinking about, I should say, when I was watching Jokic this weekend. I don't know that Jokic will ever be able to reach LeBron's 2-way peak, because LeBron, for over a decade, was a top 3 defender in the league. Maybe not in terms of regular season awards, but like, especially in playoff settings from the mid-2000s to the mid-2010s, and really still in spurts up until 2020, was able to leverage himself as an athlete on the floor in transition and on defense in a way that Jokic never will be able to do. And overall, LeBron and Jokic are just so different as players that there's just a huge subjectivity element. And this is probably something that we'll just argue about forever. But I will say this. I have never seen a basketball player more easily generate offense for his team than Nikola Jokic is doing right now. Not LeBron, not Kobe, not KD, not Steph. It may not have the aesthetic flair that some of those guys do. It may not look the same as some of the great offensive players of old, but it is brutally effective. There isn't a soul in the league that can guard him one-on-one. He's the best passer in the league. There's very little variance in his game compared to his peers. Again, he's an elite shooter, but he doesn't take a lot of jump shots. He's not depending on whether or not jump shots go in or don't go in. His short-range scoring has sky-high field goal percentage. Another way to put it is like this. A Jokic ISO or a ball screen or a post-up has a score percentage, meaning percentage of possessions that end in points, have a score percentage well over 50%. So in late game situations, they have the safest bet to generate points out of anybody in the league, which is another part of why they've been a top 5 clutch offense this year. Here's another basic stat to explain just how effective Jokic has been as an offensive player to start this year. In Jokic's minutes this year, the Nuggets have a 124 offensive rating, despite not having a single teammate that can reliably provide 20 points a game on the offensive end of the floor. We got to call it like we see it. Nobody has ever been this effective on the offensive end of the floor in the history of basketball. This is unprecedented. Again, I'm a big LeBron fan. I'm a big Steph fan. And Steph's had some really special moments, and LeBron was a really damn good offensive player at his peak. Pretty close to this. But I don't think he was this good on the offensive end, even at his absolute peak. 32 points, 14 rebounds, 10 assists per game on 65% true shooting so far to start this year. It's just completely ridiculous. I don't know what else to say. We can't lie about what we're seeing right now. No one's ever done this. This is unprecedented in terms of offensive production on at the NBA level. All right, let's get into our power rankings. And again, all of our odds that I go over today are provided by our partner DraftKings, in case you're interested in jumping on any of these teams in terms of futures. Starting with number 10, the Miami Heat. They've won 3 in a row, 7 of their last 10. Some quality wins in there too. They beat the Cavs, they beat the Lakers, the Suns, and the Mavs all over that 10-game span. In this last 10 games, they're 11th in offense, 9th in defense, 6th in net rating, and 9th in rebounding. Tyler Herro has been hooping. He was unreal during the win against Cleveland yesterday. Really was the primary offensive initiator. A lot of action where they were looking to attack Garland, going through him, shooting over the top of him, that sort of thing. 34 points, 6 rebounds, and 7 assists for Tyler Herro in the win. He's also averaging 24, 6, and 5 in the 7-3 stretch. Also, little known fact, Tyler Herro has been the best pull-up jump shooter in the league this year. Remember, that was something that was kind of a weakness for him in the early part of his career, where he was like capable of getting hot as a pull-up shooter. He just was never consistent with it. But he's been getting 1.23 points per pull-up jump shot this year, number 1 in the league among the 36 players that have attempted at least 100 pull-up jump shots. Jimmy Butler came back from his injury. They've started playing through him more, and he's found a really nice rhythm. He's at 22, 6, and 5 on 63% from the field and 58% from 3 over this 10-game stretch. And they're getting some really nice contributions down the roster. They moved Terry Rozier to the bench, and he's been shooting the ball better because he can just come in and be aggressive without fear of stepping on other guys' toes. Drew Smith has been giving them good minutes off the bench too. He's just an athletic guard who plays super hard. He slides his feet, guards the ball well. He competes on the glass, and he's been shooting the ball well as well. And they're just that usual pesky Miami Heat type of defense, mixing up scheme, randomly picking up full court, randomly going zone. They were doing a really good job yesterday of bogging down the Cavs pick and roll attack by digging down on the roll man and causing some issues there. They held Cleveland to just 8 points on roll man possessions yesterday. They are the 4th best team in the league at scoring on roll man possessions and had double figures in 3 straight games on roll man possessions, and the Heat held them to 8 just by digging down, slapping at the ball, disrupting the rhythm of those guys on the catch. They defended Donovan Mitchell really well. Good mix of Jimmy Butler and Hayward Highsmith there. The biggest thing for them by far, though, is they're getting consistent offensive production on 2 fronts now with Jimmy getting going. If you remember, to start the year, it was all Tyler Herro, and Jimmy and Bam were floundering, and a lot of bad body language, a lot of weird shot selection, and now Jimmy and Tyler have it going, and they look more like a good team. And if you believe in the Heat, right now they are plus 4,500 to win the title and plus 1,600 to win the Eastern Conference. Number 9, the Golden State Warriors, a 2-2 week. Lost a tough one to Denver. They were up 8 with 4.5 minutes left, but then Jokic walked them down, and then the Nuggets got a couple of good defensive possessions against Steph where they denied him the basketball, got some stops. Nuggets got that win. But then the Warriors bounced back by beating Houston without Steph and Draymond, one of the biggest wins for them this season. Jonathan Kuminga went off in that game. Really impressive defensive effort from the whole group. Just found money to win a game like that against a really good Western Conference team without your 2 best players. Then they split a 2-game home set against Minnesota. 2 very different games. Like Draymond came off the bench in the first game, and then Wiggins was out for the second game. And it was all basically to facilitate a return for Jonathan Kuminga to the starting lineup. And the idea here is they desperately need someone that can become that consistent secondary scorer next to Steph. And statistically, in theory, it's doing that in his 4 games that he started here consecutively. It started all of these last 4 games. He's averaging 21 points on 49% from the field and 38% from 3. But it is inconsistent. Like, he was unbelievably good in the Houston game and then pretty uneven in the Minnesota games. And so I think part of it is to try to drive some rhythm for Kuminga, to try to get him going so that they get some more consistent scoring next to Steph. But I also think it serves a second purpose, and that is there have been a lot of reports going around that the Warriors are looking for a second star to pair with Steph. Not a big shock. This has been one of the biggest talking points surrounding this team to start the season. But changes in value can go a long way to facilitate that. So even if someone like me doesn't think Jonathan Kuminga is ready to be a secondary scoring option on a championship level team, he can certainly do it during the regular season for a middle of the pack Western Conference team. And then in the process, he can increase his trade value. Then on the other end, like for instance, we talked about Brandon Ingram a lot in the mailbag. If Brandon Ingram has a serious ankle injury like this, that could affect his trade value. So maybe something like Kuminga's value going up and Ingram's value going down could facilitate something like that. Or if it's not Brandon Ingram, maybe it's someone else. But I think that's a big part of it too. Just trying to drive rhythm, trying to provide some secondary scoring for Steph, and trying to increase Jonathan Kuminga's trade value by getting him as much opportunity as possible. Last thing I wanted to hit before we move on, there was a really funny moment at the end of the second Timberwolves game. Everyone's seen the highlight of Draymond Green getting that dunk and then doing the night celebration as he runs down the floor. But there was a really funny basketball concept at play there. because they ran an inverted ball screen with Steph screening for Draymond as he was getting downhill. And it's kind of genius if you think about it, because we all know, I shouldn't say genius, it's kind of like diabolical and evil to do this, but that's what's so funny about it. Draymond obviously doesn't like Rudy Gobert. Not a big shock. He's openly put him in a headlock on national television. And then if you guys remember in the Western Conference Finals last year in Game 2, he's like throwing a party in the stands as he's covering the Luka Doncic game winner over Rudy Gobert to put the Mavs up 2-0 in that series. So not exactly a big shock that Draymond doesn't like Rudy Gobert. That said, though, this was the perfect way to try to humiliate him. So again, like, what do we always talk about with inverted ball screens? The big guy who's guarding the ball doesn't have a lot of experience navigating screens because he's usually the screen defender, not the guy fighting through the screen, right? Then you've got a shooter screening for Draymond. In this case, the best shooter in the world. So Jaden McDaniels, who's guarding Steph, is not going to want to help off of Steph to stop Draymond Green driving to the basket. So it's a genius play design because all Draymond has to do, and you can see he saw it coming the whole time. He's high stepping up the floor, just starting to get his groove going before he even starts attacking. And then as he starts driving, all Steph has to do is hit Gobert with a good screen. Jaden McDaniels is not going to help. And Draymond just turns the corner, goes up there and jackhammers it with one hand and goes down the floor doing the night-night. Just hilarious because, like, again, this is the type of pettiness that we all live for, right? A beef between two players, a play designed specifically to humiliate that player, and then Draymond gets to take his victory lap on Rudy Gobert. If you're looking to bet on the Warriors futures right now, they're plus 1,800 to win the title, plus 900 to win the Western Conference. Number 8, the Milwaukee Bucks. Not going to spend too much time on them because we just talked about them at the top of the show, but 2-2 this week. Blew out the Pistons in Detroit. Then they got ran off the floor against Atlanta. Just a really sloppy game for their transition defense. They just got ran by all night long by Jalen Johnson. Then they lost a tough game in Boston. And that one was disappointing because they were in that game really until late and then just made some execution errors. Dame tried to like grift a foul on a three-point shot against Jaylen Brown. On the ensuing miss, Giannis like gambled in the backcourt. Boston scored in transition. I thought Giannis took 2 really bad pull-up jump shots down the stretch of that game that he didn't need to take. I just thought Tatum outplayed them both down the stretch in that game. So a little bit disappointing there, but then they got a bounce-back win against Brooklyn that we talked about off the top, which was a really impressive game, a really impressive show of fight from that team. Bucks right now plus 1,700 to win the title, plus 800 to win the Eastern Conference. Number 7, the Orlando Magic, a 2-2 week. Couple of losses in New York and Philly. Got some really a couple losses in New York and Philly, and then they won in Philly, and then they got a win at home against the Suns. Got some really bad news on the Franz Wagner front. He tore his oblique. Kind of crazy because I can't even remember the previous time I heard of that injury happening to an NBA player. And now it's happened to 2 of the best players on the same team like a month apart. So that's really strange. But they still have a super high floor because they still have a ton of perimeter speed and a lot of guys who can guard the ball at multiple positions. And they already won their first game without Franz, coming back to beat the Suns yesterday. Jalen Suggs really took over the creation load in that game. He's hit 4 threes in 3 consecutive games. A lot of really impressive footwork from Jalen Suggs in that game. A lot of, again, it's always interesting when you see guys get hurt and guys step into larger roles. You get to learn more about some of their more advanced skill development. And Jalen Suggs, a lot of nifty step throughs and pivots and pump fakes leading into counters, and just a lot of really impressive scoring chops that he showed in the short to mid range in that game against the Suns. But unfortunately, this Franz Wagner injury comes at the worst possible time because Orlando's next 6 games are at Milwaukee, and then a homestand against OKC, Miami, Boston, Miami again, and the New York Knicks. So might drop some games here in the standings. It'll be really interesting to see with that high floor I'm talking about at home, playing in front of their home crowd. If they could just somehow eke out 2 or 3 of those wins, they could be in pretty good shape moving forward. The Magic right now plus 4,500 to win the title, plus 1,500 to win the Eastern Conference. Number 6, the Houston Rockets. A 1-2 week for them. They lost on the road in Sacramento, and then they suffered a bad loss to Golden State in San Francisco without Steph or Draymond playing. The offense really bogged down in that one. That's one of the big things I've noticed with Houston this year is the inconsistency of Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet. When those 2 guys are good, bad, and everything in between on any given night, it is really difficult for them to have like steady offensive production. And like when both of them struggle, they can lose to anyone. In that Warriors game, Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet combined to go 9 for 32 from the field for just 27 points. And again, I went over some examples last week, but whenever those two struggle, it's like a guaranteed loss regardless of who they're playing, just because of their offensive limitations. But Ime Udoka jumped on them after that game and basically called them soft. And then they had a nice little bounce back win against the Clippers, who were missing James Harden. The Rockets right now are plus 5,000 to win the NBA title and plus 2,000 to win the Western Conference. Number 5, the Memphis Grizzlies. They've won 3 in a row and now 9 out of 10. Should have beat Dallas too. They were up big in the fourth quarter, but they really lost their composure in that game. Committed several silly fouls, and then they lost Spencer Dinwiddie twice in crunch time for threes. Somewhat discouraging because they had won 6 in a row against some bad teams, and that could have been like that legitimizing win. But then they got their legitimizing win against Boston. They bounced back, first of all, beating the Kings. Then they beat the Celtics in Boston. Ja Morant goes for 32, 9, and 9. Has one of the best highlights I've seen in the last few years, that double pump reverse dunk. Like, he's been putting on a show every night, and he's just becoming must-see television. But I watched that dunk, that driving baseline dunk, like 20 times that night. It's legitimately one of the best highlights I've seen in recent years, and just goes to show the incredible show that Ja Morant is. And then Jaren Jackson Jr., he put on an absolute show of fundamentally great basketball in that second half, just carrying the Memphis offense for stretches, hitting threes. He was putting every Boston wing in the blender and just pivoting over both shoulders for spinning hook shots and just a clinic of post moves. He had 3 steals and 4 blocks. He's been playing really, really well for this team. And it just, him giving them like real balance to their scoring. Because like, again, like Bane provides like screening action scoring, right? Like shooting coming off of screens, a guy who can get downhill on curls, stuff like that. Ja Morant's just kind of a unicorn, right? But like Jaren Jackson brings the bully ball. He brings the big mismatch attacking forward who can beat switches with size. And again, that just rounds everything out for them offensively. That's their 3rd in offense overall over this 10-game span, 7th in defense over this 10-game span. They're fast on the perimeter. They have rim protection. They're defending the 3-point line incredibly well in this streak. They're allowing fewer than 12 made threes per game, which is 3rd best in the NBA over this 10-game span. They're also top 10 in forcing turnovers and scoring on turnovers over this span. The only weird thing is the Marcus Smart fit has looked a little odd as of late. He's been coming off the bench. He's taken some funky shots. His rotation minutes seem to be shrinking a little bit. He's not as good defensively as he used to be. He was the culprit of a lot of those bad fouls at the end against Dallas. Just something I'm keeping an eye on because I wonder if he ends up getting moved before the end of this year. The Grizzlies are plus 3,000 to win the title, plus 1,400 to win the Western Conference. Number 4, the Dallas Mavericks, quickly becoming one of my the teams that I'm highest on here around the NBA. They've won 7 in a row and 11 out of 12. They have the best record in the league over the last 12 games for any team. 3rd in offense, 7th in defense, 2nd in net rating, 1st in rebounding. And since returning from injury, Luka has looked more like Luka. 31, 11, and 10 on 51% from the field and 43% from 3. Basically the MVP level Luka that we all knew Luka could be, but that he wasn't being to start this year. I wasn't particularly worried about it. I figured it would just take some time, and it seems to be that he's coming around. And then after going 19 for 30 from the field over the last 2 games, Kyrie Irving is now up to 63% true shooting on the season. Remember how we talked about Tyler Herro in his pull-up jump shooting? Kyrie Irving's been the 3rd best pull-up jump shooter in the league to start this year. 36 players have attempted at least 100. Kyrie's getting 1.19 points per attempt, which ranks 3rd. They're also super deep. They have a half dozen different role players that can be a star on any given night, a star in their role, I mean. And then they're versatile. They're huge on the front line, fast on the perimeter. I was a little concerned about their perimeter speed to start the year, but then a couple guys popped. Like Quentin Grimes has popped. Spencer Dinwiddie has popped. And like getting 2 athletic guards that basically were considered fringe rotation guys to start the year, that's really alleviated that concern for me. I feel like they have a ton of matchup flexibility. They have a lot more ball handling and shooting than last year. Again, I believe that Luka and Kyrie will play better in the postseason this year than they did last year. I think they're the 3rd most likely championship contending team in the league this year. I think they have a favorable schedule for the rest of this month. So like I'd be looking out for Dallas, to potentially be the number 1 seed in the West going into the new year, especially if they can win in Oklahoma City tomorrow night and gain a game on them heading into that stretch. So if you believe in the Mavs, plus 1,100 right now to win the title. According to DraftKings, plus 550 to win the Western Conference. Number 3, the Oklahoma City Thunder. Really easy schedule for them this week. Just the Jazz, the Raptors, and Pelicans. They went 3-0. Put on an offensive masterclass in the first half against Orlando. Shea and Jayson combined for 39 points on 18 shots to start that game. Alex Caruso got off to a rough start to start this year. He's hit multiple threes in back-to-back games for the first time this season, so that's a good sign. Much more fun week for the Oklahoma City Thunder coming up with the in-season tournament starting with Dallas tomorrow night. We'll be covering that game in the Wednesday morning show. The Thunder right now plus 380 to win the NBA title, plus 195 to win the Western Conference. Number 2, the Boston Celtics. It started the week 3-0, including an impressive win over the Bucks where I just thought they out-executed them down the stretch. Tatum continues to just do a really nice job executing in the half court. I thought his second half against Milwaukee was one of his best that he's played in a long time. Continues to show just a ton of growth as that surgeon in the half court decision making when things really slowed down. They dropped a tough one to the Memphis Grizzlies where they just got outshot. It was a super funky game. They stuck Jaren Jackson on Drew Holiday and just completely ignored him. And Drew Holiday shot 60% on corner threes last year, but he's just having a weird year with corner threes this year and down to 31%. Obviously a huge drop off from last year, but he just kind of struggled. It kind of threw them out of rhythm as a team. And the Celtics went 18 for 60 from 3 in that game. The Grizzlies only made 3 fewer threes on 27 fewer attempts. I had a lot of people send me questions on Twitter are you concerned at all with the Celtics and their number of in the 3-point volume that they're taking? And I'm just not. They've just shown too often that they can rein things in and get the right shots when they need to. This is, again, slippage in execution happens for every single team in the league. For super talented teams like Boston, it's not going to look like it did for the Lakers. It's not going to look like them quitting in Miami and getting blown out by 40. For them, it's going to be they settle a little bit more than they should. Maybe they don't defend as sharp as they should, and things get a little funky. But that's the equivalent of a funk for the Celtics team. I'm not concerned about their shot selection. They've shown a pretty extended sample to me of them getting that under control when they need to. Tatum, again, is just playing at the highest level I've seen him play in the half court. So, to be honest, I'm more confident in the Celtics as a championship favorite than ever. I think they're just better than last year. Again, Tatum is substantially better than last year, both statistically and in his overall feel for the game. Peyton Pritchard has become arguably the best backup guard in the league. Sam Hauser, as of late, is shooting the ball as confidently and effectively as anyone in the league. He's at 46% from 3 on 6 attempts per game in just 23 minutes per game over his last 8 games. And it's full-on green light, if he gets any space, it's going up type of stuff. And he's just hitting them at a crazy high rate. These are just influxes of talent. Hauser getting better, Pritchard getting better, Tatum getting better. These already make a team that was the best team in the league talent-wise into an even more talented team. And again, I've seen people complaining about Drew and about Jaylen and some of their struggles that they're having. I'm just not worried about them in the big picture. They're going to be fine. And so I'm just having a hard time conceptualizing any team beating Boston 4 times in 2 weeks. If you agree with me, the Celtics right now are plus 265 to win the title, plus 120 to win the Eastern Conference. And the number 1, the Cleveland Cavaliers, they won 3 straight to start the week, including just eviscerating the Nuggets in pick and roll. They just couldn't guard them in ball screens. Then they dropped a really tough one on the road in Miami. Some similar stuff to what we've seen of late, Miami just attacking Garland a lot in ball screens and in ISOs. And then the offensive glass, which is something that has periodically popped up for this team over the years, but they started really good on the defensive glass at the beginning of the season. They were a top 10 defensive rebounding team to start the season in the first month or so. In the last month, though, they've been a bottom 10 defensive rebounding team. They gave up 10 offensive rebounds to Miami and 19 second chance points. It was basically the difference in the game. And if you remember going back even to the Knicks series in the first round 2 years ago, this has been something that's popped up for them a little bit periodically, is their ability to defensive rebound. Just something to keep an eye on. The Cavaliers right now are plus 1,400 to win the title and plus 600 to win the Eastern Conference. All odds are provided by our partner, DraftKings, and that will do it for today's Power Rankings, and that will do it for today's show. As always, I sincerely appreciate you guys for supporting me and supporting Hoops Tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with a little bit of an in-season tournament preview as well as a mailbag. Make sure you get those questions dropped in the comments. I'll see you guys then.